and this is a piece of advice that Erin and I will die on that hill, is really, really good advice. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name's Mickey. I'm a therapist, and we talk about therapy things on this channel. And today, we're talking about polyamory because we have sort of vaguely mentioned polyamory in a lot of different aspects on this channel, but I've never actually sat down to make a what is polyamory video. So consider this a polyamory 101, if you will. That said, I am far from the originator of all of these ideas and definitions and things. And with that, I also want to encourage you to not use this video as your only resource. Please, please, please seek out a bunch of other information, because there are so many people who have literally made their life's work out of educating about polyamory and non-monogamy and all of the things. And they're so incredibly educated and well spoken and much more better equipped to guide you through the journey that is embracing or understanding non-monogamy. So this is meant to be a brief flyover overview for when we talk about other polyamorous subjects in the future on the channel for y'all to reference back to if you have questions and things like that. Also, as a quick disclaimer before we get started, I have mentioned this in a bunch of other videos, but I have a neurological thing that's wrong with my face. So while I am normally a very expressive person, I am not really super able to do that right now without being in a lot of pain. I didn't realize how much I emoted with my mouth. So if I look like I'm irritated or just not enjoying myself, that's probably not the case. I'm probably just trying to not move my top lip so that I don't hurt myself. So that said, let's get into the video. I have a couple of overview questions that I want to answer for y'all today, and also a brief vocabulary lesson that I think will be really fun. So let's get into that. Okay, so the first and most obvious question that I get a lot on the channel is, what exactly is polyamory or non-monogamy? And I want to be clear that it's an umbrella term that encompasses a lot of different things that are also different things to different people, right? The nice thing about non-monogamy, in my opinion, is that it's sort of a freedom from the box that relationships are traditionally put in. And so it's very expansive and customizable, and also allows people to embrace the parts of non-monogamy that work for them while sort of leaving the rest that don't really work for them. So first and foremost, if you are interested in non-monogamy or polyamory, please know that you are able to sort of take and pick and choose, quite literally. One of the things that we're going to talk about is actually called the Relationship Anarchy Smorgasbord, which is a really wonderful tool to talk about and host very intentional and critical discussions for yourself or with your partner or partners about what do you want your relationships to look like, right? The umbrella term serves to provide the community with a general means to describe and, explain what it is that we're doing over here in the non-monogamy space. And so on top of that, it's also really important that if you are engaging in a relationship with somebody who is non-monogamous or polyamorous or in an open relationship or whatever, that you clarify with them what that means to them specifically, because for, every person that you meet, if you meet 10 people who are practicing non-monogamy, you're probably going to find 10 different definitions of non-monogamy, which is great. That's totally fine. It's just important to be clear and to be specific about what that means so that we can get on the same page and have clear boundaries in our relationships. Boundaries are paramount in non-monogamy. That is one thing that unites all of the things, is that boundaries and clear expectations of roles and power are going to be paramount in maintaining everybody's safety. And so that's really important sort of across the board. Really quick, before we get into the vocab round, I also want to be clear that non-monogamy can encompass a lot of different things, including polyamory, including open relationships, including ethical non-monogamy or consensual non-monogamy, but it can also include things like being monogamish, where people are maybe mostly monogamous, but they have kind of a, openness or comfortability to non-monogamy. Sometimes it can also include things like swinging, which is often understood by some folks to be more sexual in nature than it is about the love or relationships aspect. So there's lots of different things under this umbrella term, which also means that there's lots of different opportunities to find a thing that works for you. And also, before we move any further, I want to be clear that monogamy is not a bad or antiquated or wrong thing. For a lot of people, it can feel restricting if your relationship orientation is outside of monogamy, but it's kind of a myth that polyamorous people are more evolved or more mature or better than monogamous people. That's not true. Non-monogamy and monogamy are equal in their maturity and their evolvedness. You don't have to be, or you're not de facto a better person for practicing one relationship orientation over the other. It also goes without saying that monogamy is not for securely attached people and non-monogamy is for people who have attachment disorders and commitment issues. That's not true either. So please practice an attitude of non-judgmentalism, moving in both directions, because the reality is that relationship orientation is not all that different from sexual orientation, in that people who are drawn to the thing that they're drawn to can't help it. It's just the way that they are, and it's not helpful to stigmatize or judge people regardless of what they are into. Okay, let's do a quick vocabulary speed round, just so that we're all on the same page in terms of what these things mean. First and foremost, ethical non-monogamy is kind of an umbrella term that can encompass things like polyamory, consensual non-monogamy, swinging, open relationships, monogamish, all of those things, but it can also be its own distinct orientation depending on who you ask. This is why it's important to clarify. Polycule refers to the cute little diagram that makes up the map of a person's relationship or relationships. Oftentimes people call it a polycule because it looks like a molecule. Like if you look at the little diagram, I'll put a thing on the screen so that you guys can see. But this helps to clarify, like if I am in a relationship with Aaron, but also have a separate relationship with my girlfriend, that forms like a V, right? So we're in a V type relationship, but Abby also has relationships with other people, maybe. I'm fine with it. We talked about it. Aaron gave me a face off camera, but Abby has relationships with other people. And so that will create this little diagram. That's why people call it a polycule, because it looks like a little molecule. And it just helps to visualize who and where is dating and what the fuck is going on. Which brings us to polyamorous. This is an orientation that's pretty hotly debated. From my interpretation in Aaron and I's life and the people that I practice with, polyamory refers more to the practice of having multiple relationships. Poly meaning many, amorous meaning love, right? For me, there is a particular focus on the relationship and love aspect of this rather than the sex aspect of this. However, there's not something inherently wrong or bad or immature with having a focus on the sexual part of a relationship rather than the love part of a relationship, right? It's just that I am a soft, gooey person who catches feels. And so I think it's helpful to be clear about the fact that I don't really think it's realistic for me to pursue relationships solely on the basis of sex, because I just know about myself that that's not really realistic. And also, I fundamentally believe that it's entirely possible and human for people to love more than one romantic partner, similar to how we can acknowledge that a parent has equal love for multiple children, right? It's commonly said that when you have a child, you love them with your whole heart. And then when you have a second child, you don't divide that love. Your heart just grows in order to love that child the same way that you loved the first child. I think this is totally valid, and a totally valid interpretation about romantic relationships, and a fair amount of polyamorous people also feel this way. Which that brings us to swinging, which is sometimes interpreted to be a more sexual in nature type of orientation. Oftentimes this is interpreted as a person having potentially a primary partnership, like a marriage, for example, and they are pursuing sexual connection with other people, sometimes in a partner swapping arrangement where partner A and partner B will swap with partner C and partner D in a sexual context. Sometimes there is just a desire to watch your partner be sexual with someone else. This can take all different forms, but swinging is often understood to be kind of separate and different, especially in the realm of maybe not wanting to pursue long-term relationships with somebody, but rather just being interested in a short-term, even a one-night stand type of context. That brings us to open relationships, which is slightly different in the sense that open relationships can be understood to be two people who have what's referred to as a primary partnership, where they are just open to having relationships or sexual connections with other people. This is sometimes understood to be either prescriptive hierarchical polyamory, or like a prescriptive hierarchy relationship, or to be a primary partnership. People will differ on what that means. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. But again, please have open and honest conversations with people so that you understood specifically what it is that they understand that to mean. But oftentimes people view open relationships or open marriages to be that, like, we're in relationship, that's kind of our focus, but we're totally okay if somebody has a relationship or a one night stand or a fling or something with somebody else. That's kind of okay. That brings us to monogamish, which is sort of similar depending on who you ask. Monogamish is oftentimes folks who find themselves comfortable and happy with monogamy, but will be totally okay or fine if their partner maybe has like a little makeout sesh with somebody at the bar, right? Or somebody wants to get on dating apps while their partner is on vacation for the fun of it, for the excitement of it, right? Monogamish is sort of understood to be like monogamy, but like like loosely. It can be sort of similar to an open relationship. This is why it's important to ask and to clarify. And it also can be commonly confused with ambyamory. Ambyamory is when somebody is comfortable being in a polyamorous relationship where they and their partners view and believe that it's totally possible and real to love multiple people and have multiple romantic relationships happening at the same time, or that they would be totally comfortable and happy being in a monogamous relationship. It's sort of understood to be similar to bisexual or pansexual as far as relationship orientation is concerned rather than sexuality. It's somebody who finds themselves to be happy in either or, and that they're not feeling like they're losing anything or they're being constrained or they've lost anything by being in either relationship orientation. Okay, this brings us to the term metamor, which is a little bit of a confusing one to understand. This one threw me for a loop when I first discovered polyamory. Metamor refers to your partner's partner. So if you are in a V orientation, for example, I am a hinge partner in my relationship, I am married to Aaron. I am also in a relationship with a woman, and so that woman is Aaron's metamor. They are connected to each other only through me. They're not romantically related or connected to one another. They're not in a relationship, but they do have sort of a tertiary connection to one another because I'm the V that connects them. Sometimes people refer to this as a meta or metamor. Sometimes people call it telomor, depending on who you ask, depending on the degree of like distance that you have. It can all get very complicated very quickly, but the basis of this is that metamor is your partner's partner. That actually is a great segue for us to talk about hinge partners, which is what I am. A hinge partner is the person who is in between two people, commonly called a hinge because it looks like a hinge. It, I think, makes sense in a common sense sort of way. A hinge partner is somebody who connects two people who are not in relationship romantically with one another. This is important because there is a key difference between a hinge partner or a V relationship style and a triad, or commonly called a throuple. I hate that term, but that's just a me thing. That is different because all three of those people are in relationship with each other and care about each other and are romantically involved sort of all which ways, right? A V is not the same thing as a triad or a throuple. And so that's not a hinge partner. That is just you all being in a relationship with one another, or a quad or a quint or like whatever, to however many partners there are in a thing. If they're all connected with each other, a lot of people would not necessarily refer to that as a hinge. The last thing that the last definition that I want to talk to you about before we get into types of polyamory is the term NRE. Erin and I have talked about this a lot on our podcast. If you don't know that we have a podcast, by the way, in the Descriptive, it's a fun time. We ramble quite a bit about silly things, but NRE stands for New Relationship Energy. It is commonly understood in polyamorous circles to be a thing that you should proceed with caution around because New Relationship Energy describes this phenomenon of being in a new relationship where things are exciting, they're new, it's interesting, it's all novel, and it's all very sexy and fun, and it feels very like, woo, wow, interesting. New Relationship Energy can and has been the death of many good and healthy, happy relationships, actually, because NRE can be very intoxicating. For anybody, monogamous or not, who has matched with somebody that you just have a really good connection with on a dating app, or that you met somebody and it just like clicked really easily, that's what New Relationship Energy is. And so when you already have a partner, regardless of what that orientation is, if you have a partner and then meet someone else that's new and interesting, especially for folks who are inexperienced in polyamory or haven't really walked through the NRE process before, it can be sometimes an issue where you chase after the NRE to the detriment of your other partner. So maybe you're not spending as much time with your other partner or partners. Maybe you're not really being as attentive or as kind. Maybe you abandon or break up with those relationships altogether because you're convinced that this new relationship energy will last forever. It is sort of similar to the honeymoon phase. A lot of people describe this phase in relationships in monogamous context that, like, of course everything feels great, right? Because you just met them. You haven't had time to really discover what the problems are or what the kinks are in that relationship. Not like that, but like, kinks in a host. You don't know what the problems are in that relationship yet. So of course there's a feeling of like, rose-colored glasses that kind of comes over you. So NRE in polyamorous or non-monogamous circles is sort of understood to be this phenomenon that like can be great and really fun, but can also be kind of scary, kind of dangerous, depending on the level of experience and maturity of the person who has it. Before we move on to a conversation about is there like a right and wrong way to practice polyamory, I want to educate you about the different types of polyamory. This is far from an exhaustive list, but these are the three sort of commonly referred to types. The first one being parallel polyamory. This is kind of the, like, we operate independently of each other, right? It's not quite a, like, don't ask, don't tell style, which is its own type where we just literally don't tell each other anything. But parallel polyamory is understood to be more independent and, like, parallel in the sense that, like, you don't really talk about it. There's not really a lot of interaction, and especially metamors are not really interested in or pressured to meet one another or to develop relationships with one another. It's a type of polyamory where it's understood that we are just kind of, not really talking about what's going on over there, and these sort of things never really cross, and that's all fine and okay with everybody. This is different from a type of polyamory that's called kitchen table polyamory, where the energy here is that all of the people involved in the polycule would be comfortable, in theory, to sit around a kitchen table together and have a conversation and chit chat and be friendly with one another, or to know and to meet one another. This is a type of polyamory that I think is oftentimes practiced by a lot of people, simply because it's fun to know the people who also love the people that you love, right? There is a term in polyamory called compersion that just refers to, like, a happiness at seeing your partner be happy in love with other people. And this is a really common thing in kitchen table polyamory, right? The idea of, like, meeting the person who also loves the person that I love is very appealing. And so it makes sense that we might all want to be comfy to know each other, but we don't necessarily want to date each other, right? It's common to have, I think, a good amount in common with one another. For example, one of my metamors shares a lot of the same interests that I do in being interested in D&D and Roman and Greek mythology. So it makes sense that I would probably get along with that person and be comfortable to chit chat with them, but that doesn't mean that you want to date them necessarily. This is different from lap-sitting polyamory, where essentially we're just, like, all up in each other's guts all the time. Not in a literal sense, but just in a, like, very involved sense, right? There might be a comfortability with, like, living together, even being very involved in one another's lives, maybe in a romantic context. It depends on who you ask whether or not lap-sitting polyamory involves romantic involvement. Lap-sitting polyamory, by the way, the term was coined by the Multiamory podcast, so it's not necessarily, like, an official definition. You get it. Multiamory is a great podcast, by the way, great resource. We're going to go over resources at the end. But lap-sitting polyamory just refers to, like, literally the visualization of sitting on one's lap. You'd be very involved in their life and very comfortable with them. So this is a type of polyamory where there's a heavy amount of involvement and familiarity with one another, sometimes even in a romantic context. So I want to address this question that I commonly get about, is there a right and wrong way to practice polyamory or non-monogamy? And the answer, annoyingly, is, like, yes and no. There, I think, is a lot of focus in non-monogamy about removing the bounds of monogamy and it being expansive, right? There's room for everybody to sort of determine for themselves what feels good, what makes sense, what is feasible for me or my partner or partners. And so that's all well and good. And there is also, I think, a heavy focus, especially in recent years, about practicing polyamory ethically. It's important to a lot of people to be behaving themselves in a way that conveys a respect and care for their partner and partners and metamors and even people that you interact with on dating apps or at parties and things like that. That said, it's not like there's a fucking ethics committee. There's not, like, a review board who's coming after people. There are plenty of people who practice polyamory, like, unethically, according to the sort of, prevailing minds in the thing. So it's not to say that practicing polyamory in a particular way is going to get you kicked out, right? Or, like, blacklisted. That's not how it works. And if you're a person who cares about behaving ethically and, like, caring for others, there are, like, general guidelines that you're going to want to abide by and research that you're going to want to do. The first thing that we're going to want to address in regards to this issue of, like, ethical polyamory is the question of hierarchical polyamory. I hate saying that word. I feel like I say it wrong every time. Hierarchical polyamory and power imbalances come up a lot in the discussion of ethical practice because a lot of folks who are polyamorous or are becoming polyamorous are transitioning to polyamory from monogamy. I know that it might not feel that way, by the way. When Aaron and I transitioned into polyamory, I was like, God damn it, all of these people have just been polyamorous their whole lives. That's not true. The vast majority of people who are polyamorous or open or swinging or monogamish have transitioned to this from monogamy. And so you're very much not alone in that if you're exploring that. And it can feel confusing and overwhelming. And so there's a lot of stuff to consider with hierarchical and power dynamics, the first of which being couples privilege, right? As to people who, maybe you've shared several years together or you're just very comfortable with one another, the inclination for a lot of folks is going to be to say, if this goes tits up, then we'll just say like, fuck it all and go back to monogamy, right? And I think it makes sense on the surface. And it can be a really, really hurtful thing to say, because essentially what you're doing is saying, like, if my relationships don't work out the way that I want them to, then I'll abandon all of these people who've engaged with me in good faith and maybe really do care about me for this other partner. That's kind of couples privilege incarnate. And this is why it's good to be aware of that, because it feels really bad to be on the receiving end of somebody saying, well, if it doesn't really work out the way that I want to, then I'll just abandon you, right? In favor of my other partner who I love more than you. This is why the practice of ethical polyamory is at the focus of a lot of people's mind, is because couples privilege can cause folks to treat the third party in a relationship inequitably and without the care and respect that they deserve, which sucks. It's very alienating. As a person who's been on the receiving end of this, really don't recommend. It's very unfun, and it actually is kind of heartbreaking. Even when you don't have a really intense connection with somebody, it can just feel very dehumanizing. So in wanting to address the issue of hierarchical polyamory versus non-hierarchical, let's get clear about what those mean. First of all, hierarchical polyamory is the practice of polyamory where maybe we agree that we can love multiple people and we are prioritizing this primary relationship, right? A primary partnership, or your partner that you came into polyamory with. Basically, you're saying that this relationship is the most important, and then all of these other relationships come second or third or, just below that. This can feel really bad to people for a lot of different reasons, not just because it feels bad to be labeled as second place, but because there's a power imbalance there, right? At the core of this is something called a veto. A lot of people refer to a veto in polyamory and hierarchical polyamory as being a very unethical thing, essentially to mean that, for example, if you are in relationship with person A, and that's the person that you came into polyamory with, you've been together for a very long time, and you're also in a relationship with person B, who maybe you met after you opened your relationship, but person A is your primary partner, and you give person A a veto power, they can say, I'm uncomfortable, I feel insecure, we're in too deep, I don't feel good, and so therefore I'm vetoing your relationship with person B without person B's consideration, without person B getting a say in the matter, and without really thinking about how person B feels about this. This is why a lot of people call hierarchical polyamory unethical, because essentially what you're doing is exercising your couple's privilege to put this person at a disadvantage in power. This sucks for a lot of reasons, but not the least of which is that it makes people feel like shit. So non-hierarchical polyamory is sort of the opposite of this in the sense that we're being mindful of couples privilege and we're trying to keep a power balance between all of the people. There will be things called descriptive hierarchy in non-hierarchical polyamory. I think the easiest example of this is with finances, right? For example, Erin and I practice non-hierarchical polyamory in a prescriptive way, or with descriptive hierarchy sometimes, because Erin and I share finances together. We share multiple businesses together. We live together. We own pets together. Our lives are entangled in many different ways. And so, for example, if I want to book a staycation with my girlfriend, I check with Erin that our shared finances, hey, how do you feel about this? We have money for it, but I just want to make sure you're comfortable. You don't have any big purchases on the horizon, et cetera, et cetera. We're all good, right? There's a checking that happens before I'm able to confirm with my girlfriend, yep, we're all good. I purchased the thing. We're great. However, on the reverse, I don't need to check with Abby about my finances with Erin because I don't share finances with her. And it's not in a judgmental or shitty way. It's just that my money is my money. And so Abby doesn't need to know about, for example, if Erin and I are booking a vacation, there will be a conversation about hey, I'm thinking about being gone for this time. Did you have any plans, or did you have, expectations that we were going to be together? Let me just make sure that all of my T's are crossed and I's are dotted before we do that, right? I want to make sure that I'm being ethical with my time, but I don't need to ask permission to spend my own money from somebody that I don't share finances with. This is a great example of prescriptive hierarchy because it's not saying that you matter less or that you have less power in my relationship. It's simply that because of the way that logistically things have worked out, there's not a need for us to have a conversation about that thing. So non-hierarchical polyamory doesn't have to include treating everybody 100% equally and saying, you get 30 minutes of my time, you get 30 minutes of my time, you get 30 minutes of my time, because that's simply not realistic sometimes. It's just acknowledging that it's not okay to use like couples privilege or power imbalances to treat people as less than or to give them less say in your relationship, essentially. So knowing all of that, a lot of people have questions about like, what the fuck do you do when you're first wading into polyamory? I know if you're watching this video, it's probably because you either have an interest in it or you're new to it and you're seeking information, which also love that for you. Thank you for doing that. And so I think it's helpful to talk about like the first stages of polyamory. What does that look like? I want to be clear, especially if you're transitioning from monogamy into polyamory, there's going to be big feelings that happen. Erin and I have spoken pretty openly, I would say, on our pod, link in description, about the impact that this had on our relationship, not because polyamory destabilized us necessarily, but because us making ethical and equitable decisions about our time and attention with other people caused us to reckon with the things that we had been not asking for, or the things that we had lied to ourselves about, like, oh, I don't need that, right? Only to see our partner giving it to other people who had asked for it and to feel like, hold on, wait a minute. I'm not getting my needs met or the things that I never had the courage to ask for, and that feels really bad. And so that was destabilizing for our marriage. So be aware that there will be big feelings that come up, and it can be really difficult to like watch your partner be loving towards someone else, even knowing that like foundationally or metaphorically you believe these things. In practice, it can feel very different, right? So I want to encourage people to just normalize that and to know that having big feelings coming up or having disagreements coming up doesn't mean that you're not polyamorous or that you are a terrible person. It doesn't mean that you're less evolved or that you are a jealous, terrible human. It just simply means that you're working through the transition process of unlearning all of the things that monogamy tells us, which are that if you love somebody enough, you'll never need someone else, right? One partner is always enough. And for a lot of people, that's not true. So unlearning these things can be really difficult. It can bring up big emotions. And for that reason, I really want to encourage people to be communicative and to practice healthy communication skills. If you don't have a foundational level of healthy communication with your partner, I do want to encourage you to back it up and have a conversation about that first. If you guys struggle to work through conflict at all, it's probably going to be prudent for you to work through those skills and to really grow that skill set before we jump into the deep end and start unseating all of these things and all of these values and like, you know, pulling this house of cards that can be really difficult and emotionally taxing for a lot of people. On top of that, I want to talk about the jealousy thing because it comes up a lot. Polyamorous people feel jealousy. Polyamorous people are human beings. Imagine like everyone else. And so jealousy comes up, especially for newly polyamorous people. The difference is in how you deal with the jealousy, right? We can make a whole video about jealousy and polyamory if you want me to do that. There are also lots of wonderful, wonderful people who have spoken ad nauseum about jealousy and attachment and all of these things. We'll just cover the resources now. Highly recommend Multiamory, both the podcast and the book. All three of those people are wonderfully educated and I think like pretty level, like pretty even keeled people about polyamory. The book Polysecure and Polywise was written by a therapist, and it's a wonderful walkthrough about attachment styles and how that relates to polyamory. It was groundbreaking at the time that it was written because like nothing like that really existed. Sex at Dawn is commonly referred to. The Ethical Slut is also like a foundational piece of polyamorous media. And even the book and seminar called Polyamory, a Clinical Toolkit for Clinicians. It's for therapists, but I think there's a lot of wonderful skills in there actually. So even if you're not a therapist, highly recommend. There's lots and lots of resources that I'm sure I didn't mention, but practice getting polyamorous information from a multitude of sources that have a variety of different perspectives. Granted that they're not like misogynistic and terrible. You get it. If you're here, I assume you get it. But having conversations about jealousy and emotions and attachment and all of that is going to be critical in the way that you move through jealousy rather than being stuck in it and allowing that to make the decisions for you, being like in the driver's seat of your relationship. Along with that, just as a sort of errant piece of advice before we wrap up, a lot of folks in polyamory recommend that, especially if you're transitioning from monogamy with a partner into polyamory, polyamory that you start by dating separately from your partner. And this is a piece of advice that Erin and I will die on that hill. It's really, really good advice, because there are a good amount of people, I would say, who transition into polyamory with their partner by saying that they are a package deal. They refuse to date without one another. And while I'm not here to judge the way that anybody works through their own stuff, I will say that having dated separately, Erin and I learned so much about not just ourselves, but about each other and about our relationship and relationships generally. And had we insisted on dating as a package deal, I don't know that we would have learned those things. So it's also helpful from an attachment perspective if you feel unsafe or unable to date without your partner, or about your partner dating without you. There's probably some attachment stuff going on that really would be prudent to address. Again, Polysecure is a great book. I almost called it Polywise. Polysecure and Polywise go together. But Polysecure is a great walkthrough about attachment styles and all of those things. And so if you are feeling like, I could never stomach seeing my partner date separately, so therefore we'll just date together, and insist on things like threesomes, or insist on a triad where that partner loves us both equally and could never have separate experiences with us and only interacts with us for the two of us while we're together at the same time doing exactly the same thing with the exact same amount of attention. Again, we might have attachment issues and things that we need to work through, because that's not the reality of polyamory for a lot of people, first of all, and also not the reality about a triad or throuple or shared relationship. The truth is that triads and thruples, first of all, are quite rare, actually. They're really a difficult relationship style to find. There simply are just not that many people who are on dating apps going like, please, oh, please, I wish for a couple to adopt me. Like, that's not really a common occurrence, at least in my experience anyways. Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong, but it's not a super common occurrence. And it can be not ethical depending on how you engage with it, right? If you're insisting that this person love you equally and spend exactly the same amount of time and all of these things, like, where is that coming from, right? Is that an attachment thing? Is that a jealousy thing? Is that a fear thing? All of those are very human emotions, and they're probably useful for you to work through before you subject this person to an unethical relationship style that does kind of dehumanize them and prioritizes your couple's privilege over this person's like genuine love and connection with either of you. Because the reality is that even if you do find a wonderful throuple or triad with this person who does love you both equally, it's entirely possible that that might change, right? People's feelings evolve and change over time. We might have to deal with practical limitations about like what happens when somebody goes on vacation, what happens when somebody's not available, what happens when schedules don't match up, right? All of these things can cause us to bump up against the couple's privilege and hierarchical stuff that we talked about before. So food for thought, just again, as an errant piece of advice before we wrap up, it can be really helpful to sort of, get your sea legs with polyamory by dating separately and exploring what that looks like before engaging in the search for a triad or throuple or what have you. There is so much about polyamory for us to unpack. I actually have an outline for a whole second video. If you guys want me to make that video, let me know. I am happy to continue to talk about foundational skills and specific stuff. If you guys have questions, you can leave them in the comments. Maybe we'll do a polyamory Q&A. I'm happy to do that too. So let me know. If you guys want to support the channel, you can like the videos and those types of things. Leave me comments. Let me know what your experience is. If you're also polyamorous, I'd love to hear what your thoughts and feelings and lessons are. Because again, polyamory is expansive and there's so many experiences. So let me know what your thoughts and feels are. But yeah, you can leave me comments. Also subscribe to the channel. We talk about stuff like this and we do pop culture and educational stuff. So love to have you stay for that. And then you can share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow. And I will see you guys next Saturday. Okay, bye.